Alright, so now I want to talk to you a little bit about color and how we can load colors in. Yes, you can mix your own colors and you can play with whatever here. You can always double click on swatches, and we'll talk about that too, but most designers and most people, we want to use colors consistently, so we use swatches. So looking at the swatch panel here, I mentioned before that we already have loaded. We have registration in black, which are just two versions of the same thing. We have paper, which is white. It doesn't actually mean you'll print white ink. It means whatever the color the paper is, that swatch will be. So if you're printing on white paper, paper really is white. If you're printing on red paper, paper is actually red. So it's something to know. It's one of those things designers just learn to sort of account for. But obviously, none of you are designers and may not know how to do that or may not have that mental process. There's a lot of things I've learned as a designer. I just think about that not everybody does. So let's say you want to actually add other colors. How are you going to go about doing that? The easiest thing to do is to come up here to what's called a hamburger menu. It's three little lines, and we want to click on it and select new color swatch. So here we can choose by default, because this is a print document, we'll get CMYK. But if we click on here, we have other options just for reference. We'll want to use CMYK swatches, but if, for example, you needed to use Pantone, which are these special pre-mixed inks, we don't want to use that unless we're actually printing on a press. We have access to those. You can also load in other libraries. But for our purposes, we'll work with CMYK. So then you enter values that are based on CMYK. I have no idea why it defaults to black being the predominant percentage, but you would then enter your numbers. What I usually do is I find a guide, and that's how I know what colors I want to use. And I'll show you a way to do that, but just to look at how to do this. So we're doing it as a process color, meaning it uses all the colors of CMYK or some portion of it. Not every color will have, like I have black set to 0 right now, but it means basically it will mix the colors inside the printer or on the press to get the color we want. We can also do spot. That's what we usually use for Pantone, meaning the color is going to come pre-mixed, already loaded, and it's not going to have to mix basically on press. Because the way color works on a press is they'll lay all 4 of these colors down as these tiny little dots, and then that will make the actual color. It doesn't physically mix it, it mixes it visually. If you had a loop, you could actually look at and hold that up to a printed piece, and it would show you all the dots that are involved in that printed piece. Even your inkjet uses dots. But you probably don't have a loop. A magnifying glass might work if you have it, but anyway, we want to go ahead and say okay, and then number 1, it's probably going to pop to your CC libraries because it wants to add every color you make to that. That can be annoying. And then it's going to add it to your swatches, so now that's available for you to use. You also could have just double clicked on here, and then you could go ahead and select stuff, visually select what you want. Not as efficient. You'll want to make sure to say add CMYK swatch because you want CMYK values. This will show you RGB, which is screen, lab, which is another custom. They'll show you the hex code, which is web specific. Hex codes are a little more accurate than RGB colors, and then it'll also show you CMYK. You can click add CMYK swatch and it'll add it. So that's the other sort of option for you to add color. Something else I wanted to bring up, so I noticed, some people aren't creatives. They may be in like the math department and has probably never thought about color. So I did bring up this thing that Adobe has created called Adobe Color. The website is just color.adobe.com, and it allows you to come up with a color palette. ideally, I would look at what photos you're using, and if you notice certain colors or certain tones are prevalent, build your color palette off that. However, you also could come here and use this, and this will show you values. It's showing the CMYK on one side, and then the RGB can show too. There's the hex codes, and you can choose color mode. So sorry, this is RGB, not CMYK. I just don't normally see it with 4 values. So we can choose CMYK values. So even though the colors on the screen will always look brighter than they do in print, at least you'll have values that you could type in. It gives you options over here on the side of analogous, which means colors that are next to each other, monochromatic, which would almost right now look similar. And then you could do complementary, which are going to pull colors from opposition, split complementary, pulls in a different order, triadic, double split complementary, so a little more complicated, square, so literally pulling square, compound, shades, and you could do custom. So you could use these to help you. You also can then pull these and decide where you're going to orient yourself and get colors. You also could go a variety of other places to pick and choose colors, but the nice part about this, like I said, is it has CMYK values. I also, because I've been doing this a long time, I've printed books, which are nice because I can see the accurate sort of printed color, which have these values. And you could actually send this to your InDesign file, or you could write this up. That's up to you. You also can explore, so you can look at other people's color palettes and get an idea of sort of what's out there and how those colors could be used. You can look at trends if you really wanted to and see what sort of colors are currently like really hot, basically, or really popular, depending on what you want to do. You could also, there are libraries you can pull. This is one of those things that would be helpful to load into your files. And it's not just specific to InDesign, it's also for like Illustrator is another place where you might use the color. Alright, so this actually pulls my libraries that I could work from, and it'll allow you to pull yours too. So this is just one way to choose colors. It's up to you as to how you want to go about it, how you want to use it. But this uses the color wheel. We have extract theme, so you could actually take a photo and pull it here. So that would be a way to do it. Extract gradient, and there's different accessibility because we can get into the issue of being colorblind and that type of thing. But just to kind of introduce you to the idea of the color wheel, so this one, analogous, you can pull whatever and kind of see, analogous are basically colors right next to each other. We get out further, you know, and this is much more nuanced than what I might do myself. Monochromatic is whatever this color is, they're going to pull versions. But yeah, so you can have a whole range how you want to do this, but that's an option if you're not sure, like, how do I come up with really cool colors, or I don't know what to do, because you should really use a consistent color palette. So you could come here and base your colors off of that and then deploy it here. Keeping in mind too, I'm just going to draw a shape quickly for reference, that you have a fill, which is the square, and a stroke, which is the square donut, and those are separate values. Whichever one is on top at any moment, that's the one that you're editing. So, and that's the one that you can change. So I'm just going to make the stroke bigger so you can see it. So fill is what's on the inside. Stroke is the outline of the object. A line can only have a fill, or it can only have a stroke. If you give it a fill, it may show up on your screen, but when you make it a PDF, it also, or it will not show up. So we do a project with students in our beginning design classes, and they often make that mistake, and they're like, I don't know where the lines went. The lines are there, they just don't show up if they only have a fill applied and not a stroke. And you can swap these colors by hitting this little double arrow, and it will flip which color, because I'm notoriously bad for forgetting whether or not I had my fill or stroke and selecting a color and go, that's not the one I wanted to change. So that can be helpful to flip it. You can obviously, as I said, you can change them down here. Depending on what you're in, you can change it up here. You also can come over to your swatches. But what I'll want you to do for this activity to prove you've done it, load at least 4 swatches that you want to use into the file so that I can see them here when I click on this. And you don't have to necessarily put it anywhere on screen. I just want to see that you actually were able to create swatches correctly and load them into the file. So that's what you need to do. You're going to go ahead and save it, and you'll submit that with this activity to prove you've done this. So that's kind of the really basics of how you use color. There's not much more complicated, at least in InDesign, to deal with color, but that's how you can add swatches. And it's important to add the swatches so that you're consistent and you're not always having to look for the value. If you do need help choosing a color palette, please feel free to reach out. I'm happy to help, but that's kind of the basics of how you will choose colors.